Hi, welcome to Skybrief. My name is Weston and I'll be your CFI today. In this video, we are going to get into the nitty-gritty details of one of my favorite maneuvers, steep turns. In all of my maneuver lessons, we will first do a pre-flight ground, this video. Next, I'll show you how it's done and some of the aerodynamics in the simulator, the flight portion. And then we will finally do a post-flight briefing back here to discuss common errors that student pilots make so that you can avoid them. With that, let's get into it. Okay, first off, what are steep turns? Well, we'll get into the ACS standards in a minute, but to put it very simply, steep turns are where you perform two 360-degree turns in opposite directions, one after the other. And you do this at a steep bank angle, 45 degrees for private and 50 for commercial. The entire time, this is the tricky part, the entire time you must remain at the same altitude that you started at and airspeed that you started at as much as possible. And so very simply, that's what a steep turn is, and that's what we'll be working through, how to get through that. Okay, so you guys remember the four forces of flight, right? That'll be lift, weight, thrust, and drag. Well, in certain level flight, an airplane is generating a specific amount of lift in order to counteract its weight. And when we bank an airplane, we are tilting the total lift from straight up to the side, to kind of diagonal. And part of it is now transferred into pulling us through the turn horizontally to make that turn. So there's, in other words, there's less upward lift than before, and you're going to start to sink, okay? But we still need to maintain our altitude. So in order to do that, we need to increase our total lift. All right, let's talk about load factor. I'm gonna try to do this in the simplest way I possibly can. Load factor is the ratio of the total lift generated to the aircraft's weight. Your weight in an aircraft should roughly always stay the same in a maneuver, but the lift changes depending on what you're doing with the airplane. So anytime the airplane has to generate more lift than usual, the load factor goes up. Now, in a steep turn, the lift vector tilts like we talked about, and some of the lift is now pulling us sideways into the turn, and there's less lift holding you up, right? We've been over this. And to maintain altitude, we're gonna have to increase our lift. And when we increase our lift, our weight remaining the same, we're increasing our load factor. That's the G-force that you're feeling in the turn. For example, if we bank over to about 45 degrees, we're gonna be pulling roughly 1.4 Gs, okay? And at 50 degrees of bank, it's 1.6 Gs. And then we bank all the way over to 60 degrees, that's 2 Gs of load factor, meaning that the airplane is generating roughly twice your weight in lift to stay level. That's why your body feels heavier, why steep turns need smoother, more precise inputs, right? So that's the big idea. More bank requires more lift means more load factor, and that increase in load factor is the G forces that you're feeling in the turn. And like we talked about, we need to increase our lift, but the airplane doesn't magically create lift, so we're gonna have to do that by increasing the angle of attack by pulling back on the controls. Okay, angle of attack and lift go hand in hand. When you increase the angle of attack, the wing produces more lift, like in a takeoff, right? That extra lift is what offsets the tilted lift vector in a steep turn when we pull back on the controls and brings the airplane back to having enough vertical lift to stay level throughout the entire turn. Here's where this all comes together, okay? Higher load factor requires higher total lift, which requires a higher angle of attack by pitching back on the controls, which puts you closer to the critical angle of attack, or in other words, the angle of attack where you stall the airplane, right? That means that the airplane will stall at a higher airspeed than normal. So if your stall speed is normally 50 knots and you're at 1.6 Gs, it's now gonna be 63 knots. So that's why we have to be so careful in steep turns. Once you pass about 45 degrees of bank, you'll notice overbanking tendency a lot, which what that means is that the outer wing in a turn travels faster than the inner wing, so it generates more lift because it's moving faster, and it's going to keep trying to bank over. So part of a smooth steep turn is learning to, once you get over to your bank angle, to apply just a little bit of opposite aileron to keep a standard and stable constant bank angle. Okay, in the ACS, a steep turn is 45 degrees of bank for a private pilot, and for a commercial pilot, it's 50 degrees of bank. To meet the ACS standards, you must maintain your altitude plus or minus 100 feet of your starting altitude, plus or minus 10 knots of your starting airspeed, maintain the bank angle plus or minus 5 degrees, and your rollout heading must be within plus or minus 10 degrees of your entry heading, and you have to do this smoothly. These numbers matter, and that's what your examiner is going to be grading you on, and it should also give you a picture of what a polished steep turn should look like. So that's the aerodynamic foundation behind steep turns, okay? Tilted lift vector, more load factor, higher angle of attack necessary, and therefore higher stall speed, and then the natural overbanking tendency, and the ACS standards that you'll be measured against, okay? With these principles in mind, the airplane is gonna make more sense, and the maneuver becomes more predictable instead of intimidating, okay? In the next video, we're gonna hop into the sim and show you what a smooth steep turn actually looks like, and how to do it from the pilot seat. So we'll see you over there. Take care.